everybody. We are here with Chris Lintz, talking to us about why is obsidian from diverse sources found so widespread across the Southern Plains. This is from the Southwestern Federation of Archaeological Societies that was held in Canyon, Texas this year. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate the opportunity to re-record this talk. I've been compiling obsidian studies for the last 20 years or so in a passive way. And I was always curious about why obsidian occurs so far from the sources, because we have no volcanic sources anywhere in the Southern Plains. One of the things that obsidian is a natural volcanic glass that does not occur around here. And sources from the Northwest Research Obsidian Labs indicate there's more than 119 kinds of, that was Larry Banks points out there's 119 different kinds of church and quartzite suitable for making stone tools across the Southern Plains in the Trans-Mississippi South. Throughout Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, it occurs in low frequencies at sites across broad regions. And we do know from the Northwest Research Lab that there's about 350 volcanoes with obsidian in the continental United States. So Southern Plains obsidian also occurs from 12 Mexican sources found and 22 North American Conus volcanoes that occur on the Great Plains. So what I'm concerned about is looking at the occurrence of obsidian across this region. My database indicates that the furthest sources of obsidian is 1,370 miles from a volcano in Northern California that reached the central Oklahoma area. And sources from the Northwest Plains of Mexico are comparable sources. So with this, we're going to explore the distribution of obsidian. What is obsidian? What is the distribution? And ultimately try to look at the question of why we can expect to find it here in some abundance. Particularly focusing on the Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas locations. So obsidian is usually found as a black nodule. It's a rhyolitic silica-rich volcanic rock that usually occurs as nodules. And what I'm showing here is the range of colors that we typically find. Most are black, but there are other varieties, as you can see. The most common are snowflake, red mahogany, orange mahogany, black sources. Rare types are gold fleck, obsidian, and rainbow is from California. The blue obsidian occurs actually in Greece, so don't expect to find any here in North America. Question comes up to how common is obsidian, and what we know is to answer this question, we look at the alabates that occur, the obsidian that occurs near the Alabates flint quarries at Alabates Ruin 28. There are two excavation areas that were excavated between 1938 and 41 at Alabates Ruin 28. Unit 1 encompassed 145 10 by 10 foot squares and found 22 rooms buried within a 6 foot tall mound. The southern area, 150 feet away, has 439 10 by 10 foot sections with more than 31 other structures around here. Scott Brasowski's dissertation made an estimate of the number of obsidian from the site based on materials from the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. And he estimates there's 6,000 pieces of obsidian weighing about 26 pounds, a little over 26 pounds. Total of 39 artifacts, mostly manufacturing debris with a few projectile points. And the vast majority of these were that he sourced that is 38 specimens were from the Jemez Mountains, plus one from El Rochulios, which is also from the northern source of Jemez Mountains. So if Alabates is so, chert is so readily available, it's 1 mile away from the site, and most likely is the site that controlled the excavations, then if we are getting about 26 pounds, and assuming that we have a village that's occupied for 50 years even, most likely it's more than 100 years, because the early houses were converted to a mound with another house on top, then we can expect to find about a half a pound of obsidian coming to the site each year, which is not a terrible amount of material. In looking at the data I've compiled on caching behaviors across the Southern Plains, I've compiled by 2009 a total of 244 lithic caches in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And by 2020, the last time I compiled it, it's 312 caches that I have compiled. But of these, there's only 3 that have produced any obsidian at all. There's no obsidian as occurring as pure cache material, but we're finding 1 or so pieces of obsidian in 3 separate caches that are in the Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle areas. So the stuff is not coming in a commercial manner into Texas in great abundance. Most likely it's just a piece or 2 that arrive to the local area. Obsidian is representing less than 1% of the material in each of the caches. I say there's 3 caches in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. There's also 1 in Colorado. So my database right now consists of a little over 1,600 pieces of obsidian in the areas I've indicated on the map, included Colorado and eastern New Mexico, and then the counties, the states that are off to the east, as well as in south of us in northern Mexico. We're going to set all those marked in yellow aside and really just talk about the 1,153 pieces from Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, and the sources that these material come from. Okay. From the continental United States, again, we have 1,573 pieces, about 97% from the volcanoes in the western United States, and 40 pieces of obsidian from Mexican sources, or about 2%. The vast majority of the obsidian in the database from Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas are from the Jemez Mountains, primarily 3 sources: the Cerro Toledo, the Valles Grande, and the El Rochulios sources. So you can see that about 3/4 of everything, all the obsidian from the 3 state areas coming from that one source, indicated in green here. The Northwest Plains, surprisingly, has a fair amount of obsidian from the Malad and Obsidian and other sources. They're marked in yellow on this graphic and represent about 10% of the obsidian. And it's interesting to note that the abundance of the obsidian is about 10% in each of the 3 states. That is, about 10% of that found in Texas is from the Northwestern Plains too. We get a small amount from the Western United States, and then there's several from unknown sources. There's 36 of the 40 artifacts in the database are from a dozen sources in Mexico, and these are from the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt around Mexico City. It's more than 1,200 miles away from a lot of the sites that we're concerned with. And in the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt, we have more than 50 obsidian sources, of which 11 of them are contributing obsidian to the Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Southern Plains region. And looking at the map on the right shows you that the vast majority of obsidian from multiple sources occur south of the Balcones Escarpment, that is south of, let's say, San Antonio over to Louisiana. The one artifact in far west Texas, Trans-Pecos, Texas, is actually a piece of obsidian from a source that is almost immediately across the border. So it's not traveling terribly far to reach that one location. We do have one piece of obsidian reported from spiral mounds in eastern Oklahoma, and that is an end scraper from spiral mounds, and it's kind of strange in that spiral is a caddo and mound site with lavish carved shell goods and copper ornaments and a lot of exotic materials. It was dug by the Pokla Mining Company in the late 1920s. And it's unusual that this one piece of obsidian would be a lowly end scraper occurring that far north. It's quite a ways north of everything else we're finding, except for a few in Kansas and one in New Mexico. So I think that the one from Spiral Mounds, it was reported in the collections at Smithsonian Institution, but it's been acquired through nefarious sources. We don't know for sure what the context or provenience is. And from my way of thinking and looking at the patterns, that it's entirely possible that this was a souvenir picked up by someone in the 20s and 30s that ultimately got attributed to Spiral. And I don't have a strong feeling that it's actually coming from that location. The obsidian that you're seeing in Kansas and New Mexico all are from proto-historic sites that were most likely brought in by Coronado in 1541 when he did his expedition through the Southwest. The New Mexican site is at the village that Coronado was known to winter over. And he did get into southern Kansas. And they are all from a single Mexican source. And insofar as there were about 300 Mexican supporting Indians accompanying him on the expedition, it's quite likely that some obsidian came in through that source. So fundamentally, for prehistoric materials, most of it is in far south Texas. And it's interesting to note that at least two of those are from Paleo-Indian sites. The one on the Louisiana border from McFadden Beach is Clovis Point, and the other one is from the Balcones Escarpment in much further west. So if we turn our attention to the distribution of obsidian from the continental United States, this shows us the distribution of the source volcanoes that we have. Note, as I indicated, that 75% are coming from the Jemez Mountains. That's the volcano on the right. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see we have the Glass Mountain volcano at 1,370 miles from Oklahoma, central Oklahoma, where the specimen was found. Notice there's quite a cluster of volcanoes in the Northwest Plains that are also contributing to sites in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. The black squares are obsidian sources that occur in my database, but outside of the Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas region. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay. So if we consider these sources, we can divide it up into the Northwest Plains, the Western United States, including Utah, Nevada, and California, and then the Southwest sources. And what we see when we look at the Northwest Plains, the two primary sources are from Malad in Idaho and Obsidian Cliffs in Yellowstone. And what's intriguing to me is that when you look particularly at the Obsidian Cliff pieces, the vast majority of the sources are not in the northwest part of the states, but rather from the northeast part of the state. And it turns out that a considerable amount of obsidian crossed the states initially, going to places like the Hopewellian cultures in Ohio and so forth, and then to Cahokia. And then it's, as Cahokia fell apart, it's going to the Oneota cultures in Iowa. And the pattern suggests to me that these are movements of obsidian through the Oneota groups and spreading back into the southern plains from that area. But clearly not all of it is going that way. When you look at the Malad source, again, we're seeing a fair amount in northeast part of Kansas and some in Texas, but a lot of it is going down to the Balcones Escarpment and probably coming down the front range of the Rocky Mountains. The minor sources of obsidian from Northwest Plains, the Owyhee, Bear Gulch, Fish Creek, and Wright Creek are single specimens by and large that occur in the sources I'm indicating. And again, I think they're going down the trails along the front range of the Rocky Mountains to get into the Southern Plains area. If you look at the Western US obsidian sources, again, it's showing you the location of the recovery sites relative to the source of the volcanoes. And again, I'm portraying the Black Rock Desert material largely going around the north end of the Rocky Mountains rather than through, but this is speculation clearly on my part. If we look at the southwestern source of obsidian, particularly the non-Jemez Mountain varieties, we can see that we've got a multitude of different patterns coming into the area. And it's of interest that the Mount Taylor and Grants in northwestern New Mexico are occurring at the same sites in southern Texas as the Mule Canyon material. We do also want you to note that we do not have a single piece of these minor obsidian occurrences occurring anywhere in Kansas, at least that I've been able to locate. The obsidian that occurs in the Oklahoma Panhandle in particular is very likely occurring along the Taos Trail to the Great Salt Plains in northwest Oklahoma and are stopping along the way. If we look at the temporal component, then we see that we do have 14 specimens from the Southern Plains that are from Paleo-Indian sites, 12,000, 9,000, 12,000 years ago. 79, of course, from archaic sites, which is a huge span of time, 7,000 years from 2 to 9,000 years ago. And then we have a token amount showing up in the early ceramic, the woodland component when we talk about the High Plains area. Middle ceramic, also called late prehistoric, and is the most abundant. The late ceramic, also called protohistoric, is dropped down, but there's a substantial amount of 400 pieces that have never been reported by the folks that have done the sourcing studies as to what time periods are represented. 16 of the pieces are also from geological sources. We have 400 pieces that have never been reported by the folks. Hello. There are 16 pieces of obsidian that are found from remelted volcanic ash in far west Texas in the Trans-Pecos area. And so I pulled those out separately. So basically, about 2/3 of the assemblage we can assign to a time period based on associated artifacts or context, and about 1/3 are from unknown periods. So now that we've summarized the sources of this stuff, the question comes down to, if we have 119 pieces of locally available quartz sites and cherts from the Southern Plains, why are the people walking 1,300 miles and carrying obsidian from California to Oklahoma or from central Mexico into the Southern Plains area? And this individual, Dylan Clark, has an interesting claim that that if you're just concerned about the technology of obsidian, you're going to be missing the bet. That you have to start considering the animism or the powers inherent in rare and exotic materials. A lot of Native American groups offer thanks when they kill animals. They regard water, springs, rivers sacred, rocks are sacred. And so we have to perhaps consider that animism, the belief in the spirit of various materials, is operating with these materials too. And he points out that weapons and materials that are made from, that is obsidian, carry an inanimate power to injure and kill. And he says that many cultures have myths about magical swords, knives, and spears. And he lists 7 attributes that are characteristics inherent in obsidian that have the potential spiritually imbued traits. I've added one more that I think is equally important to his list of 7. And briefly, they're listed up there for you to read, but basically indicates that obsidian is often found as scattered nodules rather than bedrock and materials. It's a non-crystalline glassy structure producing sharper cutting edges than most of the stones. I suggest the brittleness is also an important attribute that might indicate a fickleness of the material to shatter if mistreated. Clark points out that its sharpness and workability makes it superior cutting edges, but it's also dangerous for flint knappers. And anyone that's worked obsidian knows that you are prone to cut yourself in doing it. The black color is rare, he says, for most other kinds of flints and materials. And it also changes translucency as you work it down into thinness. But I think the one that really struck me with most power was, he said, the black color signifies death. It's the color of dried blood, of rotting flesh, and of charred wood. And he says there that obsidian has a willingness to cause injury and the power to extinguish life energies among rocks. Obsidian has a spiritual reservoir for potential killing energy, and it possesses a life energy which, when modified, that is flint-knapped, works for a hunger for blood and death. That's quite speculative, but it's an intriguing concept. To support this notion, he looks at the obsidian found at the El Paso Phase Cottonwood Creek site in New Mexico. And he shows that obsidian among debitage accounts for only 1% of the lithic assemblages, but among projectile points, that is the objects used to kill animals, they constitute 21% of all projectile points. And so the disparity between the scarcity of obsidian in manufacturing debris versus the killing implements, he attributes to the animism or the spirituality of the rock itself that archaeologists really have a hard time understanding from a technological perspective. And I find that to be an intriguing concept to deal with. But how do I examine this method using my database? I don't have comparative material from all these different archaeological sites to calculate the proportion of lithic debris to finished points. But I decided if I looked at the kinds of materials in my database, then maybe I can get some insight into what's happening. So this here is the distribution of general obsidian sources by artifact type across the region. The first thing I want to be real clear about is that 560 specimens are not reported to artifact types. So there's almost half the assemblage you have to set aside as being unknown. But if we look at the other materials that we can attribute it to, it turns out that about 40% of the artifacts are manufactured debris, that is flakes or cores or unifacial material. And that's probably not surprising because it's not just manufacturing, but resharpening and fabricating materials that are going to leave the debris behind. But if we do look at the kind of formally shaped tools that are present, you'll see that 96 of the objects are arrow point, dart points, or unidentified projectiles that represent 8% of the total assemblage. And when we lump all other materials together, bifaces, corner tang knives, scrapers, drills, borers, that is represented by only a little over 3% of the material, or about 39 objects. So by and large, for people that are reporting the artifacts, projectile points do indeed seem to be more common than all other kinds of artifacts. But I'm also intrigued that I've got classes of artifacts that are pretty darn unique, and that is the effigy and cruciform artifact and obsidian pendants that I typically do not see represented in flint or chert or quartzite materials. So these are the materials that I'm talking about that are kind of unusual. The top three are items I consider to be pendants. Actually, the two from Beaver County, Oklahoma were classified as pendants, and you can see they're notched or have a stem with essentially their flakes going on. The one from Bowie County, Texas on the upper right is one that has not been identified previously as a pendant. And it is coming from Wyoming, Obsidian Cliff, Wyoming, but it maintains the general shape of material. And it's, in my way of thinking, if we think about the protective nature of obsidian, these might be amulets used to protect the person that was wearing these things from other kinds of danger that are affecting them. The lower two artifacts in these materials were identified as a scorpion effigy. I don't see the tail per se on it, but it was found by a professional archaeologist in the north side of Lake Texoma in Marshall County, and it's from Idaho. And it clearly is an effigy of some variety. And then we get this cruciform fragmentary artifact. Cruciforms are most commonly found in the El Paso region of Texas and in the lower part of the state. So to find something in west central Oklahoma that's in this form is also unusual and aberrant. So I'm thinking that these classes of artifacts are indicative of something that is a cut above or different than your traditional artifacts used for procuring everyday materials for subsistence. So in summary, the context of obsidian is considered within the study area of Texas and Kansas, 1,153 artifacts, of which about 35% or 400 of them have unknown cultural affiliations. Obsidian from 5 sources ranging from central Mexico and northwestern plains were found at 14 sites on the southern plains during Paleo-Indian period. And they include 2 Clovis points, both from Mexico. The Middle Ceramic period, or Archaic, and late prehistoric periods mostly are coming from the Jemez Mountains, the Jemez Mountain sources, and particularly the Cerro Tolito source from the Middle Ceramic period artifacts, or late prehistoric period. The popularity of Jemez Mountain obsidian sources, when they are flourishing from the Jemez Mountains, they're blocking out the rare kinds of obsidian from other Arizona and New Mexico, southern New Mexico sources during the Middle Ceramic period. And I think we can really consider that obsidian as a material has a different kind of class of spirituality that we don't see in other kinds of chert and flint. I accept the concept that they are probably specialized killing weapons and perhaps amulets and effigies, and provide spiritual protection. So when we do our archaeology, we have to consider the social and symbolic properties inherent in some material patterns, particularly for the kinds of artifacts that significantly occur outside the normal spatial distribution patterns that we're seeing with other kinds of materials. And I think that wraps it up.